Conflict-related sexual violence is an abhorrent crime that is used as a tactic of war for military, political, and economic reasons. It continues to be a feature of conflicts today, claiming thousands and thousands of victims every year. It is used to punish, terrorize, intimidate, control, and displace civilians, and in the process destroys the social fabric of communities. Survivors of sexual violence often experience severe physical and psychological health challenges, exacerbated by a lack of medical facilities. Bleeding, incontinence, HIV, sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancies accompanied by guilt, shame, ostracization, and fear of retaliation are some of the unspeakable consequences of this crime. Because conflict-related sexual violence is one of the worst global protection challenges due to its scale, prevalence, and profound impact, the Security Council adopted Resolution 1820 in 2008, which recognized that the deliberate use of sexual violence as a tactic of war exacerbates armed conflict and hinders post-conflict reconstruction and reconciliation. Sexual violence affects women, girls, men, and boys. However, women and girls are disproportionately affected. Gender discrimination prior to the conflict, with the collapse of rule of law, increases the risks faced by women and girls in conflict. The invisible nature of this crime increases its power, while social and cultural norms further alienates its victims, destroying families and communities.
As the Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence and Conflict, I have been working to ensure that adequate recognition is given to rape as a crime, that all perpetrators, irrespective of their ranks and status, are held accountable, that victims receive proper medical and psychosocial support, that women are empowered economically and politically to lift the veil of vulnerability, and that national authorities provide the leadership and take ownership over the effort aimed at addressing conflict-related sexual violence in general, and rape in particular.
Only recently has this crime received attention as a peace and security issue, which requires an operational security response.
What happened in 2008, in May, we clearly heard from peacekeepers themselves that they didn't want to be bystanders to this atrocity. They wanted to be operationally ready and prepared to confront sexual violence as part of the changing face of war, as part of a core protection of civilians mandate. So that conference actually laid the foundations for a breakthrough resolution in the Security Council in May 2008, Resolution 1820, which recognized sexual violence as a tactic of war and an impediment to peace building.
We are given a very noble mission by the Security Council. It is to save the people, to help them live under better conditions. It is to give them back a sense of hope. And of course, human rights, protection from violence, protection from sexual violence for the women and children who so often are the first targets, the first victims of the violence, is something that takes the highest priority. Well, I would be tempted, to give several examples which come from the Democratic Republic of Congo. MONUSCO, in a way, has been one of the laboratories of a number of new tools that we are using in this respect. One of the most visible and most symbolic has been, for instance, the use of surveillance drones, now for almost 2 years. Those machines monitor discreetly from an altitude what happens on the ground, and they provide our peacekeepers with, and also humanitarian organizations with invaluable information about what is happening on the ground, whether it be the movements of armed groups or actually the movements of civilians who are fleeing to escape an imminent or actual threat. Similarly, at ERC, we developed several years ago a network of alarm raising, which now uses VHF radios, and that also is extremely useful in letting our people, especially our military, our police units also, be made aware that an attack is about to happen or is beginning, and that therefore they can step in very quickly. And a third example has to do with the use of information/intelligence networks, which also allow us to do a better job in real time. And of course, it is for the leadership of the mission to make sure that at every level of the mission, everybody is aware, is informed, is trained, and is committed to step in the minute something is about to happen, whenever it's possible.
Peacekeepers have to take on a more proactive role. We absolutely cannot afford to be only reactive. And threat analysis, as part of a protection of civilians strategy, entails identifying and understanding early warning indicators, such as disappearances, political rhetoric, house raid and searches, detention at camps and checkpoints, or proximity of armed groups to civilian centers, changes in mobility patterns, in particular of women and girls, and social dislocation. Our approach to combating sexual violence is community-based, giving civilians the opportunity to participate and women and girls the chance to voice their concerns and vulnerabilities. For example, some of our missions successfully employ community liaison assistants, or CLAs. These are civilian affairs officers that are embedded with the military, but managed by a civilian component. And their job is to ensure good communication with local communities so they can help with early warning of protection threats. These staff are one of many approaches that missions use to make sure that they understand the needs and priorities of communities that they are there to support.
At the heart of conflict-related sexual violence lies gender inequality and discrimination.
Protecting women and girls from violence, including sexual violence in situations of armed conflict, cannot be addressed without their own participation and empowerment in identifying preventive mechanisms and solutions to their own protection needs, as well as contributing to institutionalizing preventive measures and arrangements.
As peacekeepers, it is important to comprehend and analyze the context and realities on the ground. Conflict-related sexual violence may be widespread and endemic. Even if it remains invisible and underreported, UN peacekeepers must be aware, look for this crime, and take credible and comprehensive measures to prevent incidents from occurring.
In order to better prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence, the Security Council has created a very robust structure of mandated arrangements which we as peacekeepers need to address and implement. The first mandated arrangement is implementing and establishing monitoring, analysis and reporting arrangements on conflict-related sexual violence. Secondly, in order to better prevent, we need to ensure that we work in close collaboration with our protection and civilians colleagues and feed into all the prevention and protection activities established by the mission. This means, for example, identifying early warning indicators relevant to conflict-related sexual violence. Thirdly, we need to enter into a dialogue for commitments with parties to the conflict, be they armed groups or governmental actors. This entails ensuring that they institutionalize prevention arrangements such as including conflict-related sexual violence through codes of conduct and training their personnel on the prohibition of committing sexual violence, as well as ensuring there is accountability for incidents of sexual violence when they do occur. We also need to address the whole issue of capacity building of our mission personnel, military, police and civilians to effectively prevent proactively conflict-related sexual violence incidents from taking place, as well as responding to them when they do take place. And we also need to deploy dedicated capacity into peacekeeping operations addressing conflict-related sexual violence through women protection advisors who address conflict-related sexual violence against women, girls, boys, and men.
The threat of sexual violence must be integrated into the operational planning process from the very start of our work on protecting civilians.
Our actions start in the preparation of the force, even during the pre-deployment training. Here we have we renovate all the points, we stress all the points again to the troops. They go to the fields very conscious that how important is the role of the military spread in more than 80 bases in order to help the civilians, to help the local administration, to help the community to not have sexual violence.
Peacekeeping missions have protection of civilian strategies that draw together the military, police and civilian components of the mission to coordinate protection activities. The most important element of protection is not the number of troops or tanks, but rather the effectiveness of planning and strategy.
When we have any information that some sexual violence occurred or that may occur, we need to go immediately to the place when we have information, and then we need to take action against the aggressors and to support the victims, and to transport, to provide medical care, to transport to a place with better assistance. And then we should not to have limits to support this kind of situation.
To end conflict-related sexual violence as peacekeepers, we need to ensure that our presence is visible, with a proactive posture and concrete actions that deter incidents from taking place. We need to conduct thorough assessments of threats to civilians, including threats of conflict-related sexual violence. This includes setting up early warning systems and acting on indicators. Through hotspot mapping, we can efficiently task our military and police's operational response to prevent incidents of sexual violence.
On prevention, where we work together with GMAC to ensure that early warning and early response are provided to mitigate the risk to sexual violence mainly within the POC side.
UMIS, for example, has mapped the incidence of sexual violence reported to the mission and organized its patrolling scheduled according to this mapping. As women protection advisors working within the human rights component, we monitor and investigate sexual violence, and we always follow very strict protocols and always put the survivors, their families and community first. We must make sure that our work does not cause them any insecurity or further stress.
Few perpetrators have been tried for crimes of sexual violence before international and regional tribunals. To end the crime of sexual violence, we must fight for justice.
Perpetrators must be brought to justice, but this can only happen through advocacy and leverage at the political level. Support for police, justice, and corrections capacity building is critical to reestablishing a basic, functioning criminal justice chain. And this has to be done from day one of any UN intervention, and this is primarily a national responsibility. Also, without the rule of law in place, perpetrators cannot be held accountable for their actions in national courts of law.
The mandate of UN Police is diverse, varying from mission to mission. One of its main functions is to take on an advisory and mentorship role with host state police and other law enforcement entities to support the development of an accountable and professional police service. Protection of civilians, including from sexual and gender-based violence, is a core duty of police peacekeepers.
Here in MINUSCA, in CAR, we are working together with the national security forces, national police, the national gendarmerie, in order to help them to provide a better service to better protect the communities. We're doing it directly in operational support to the communities and to the police, and also in terms of enhancing the capacities, the capacity building in the area of sexual gender-based violence.
Every day, victims of sexual and gender-based violence, including rape, are unable to report cases for investigation and follow up because there is no space for confidentiality. We have therefore created a partnership with the National Police and Gendarmerie to set up special units to receive these victims in confidentiality and with trained personnel.
Looking to the future, we need to think about how peace operations can further strengthen the rule of law, including policing, improve the protection of civilians, promote gender equality, uphold human rights, and much, much more. All of these contribute to peace sustainability, stabilization, and recovery. Together, we can support the eradication of conflict-related sexual violence, which simply cannot be accepted as a regular cost of conflict.
My message along the same lines is, first, do everything you can to put an end to the violence and to bring back the hope in the mind of those people, especially the younger ones who quite often have never known anything else but violence and threats to their persons. And of course, behave impeccably. That is a necessity.